right, welcome to Coding Your Career. I am joined by Kristen Ynclan today. How you doing, Kristen?
Pretty good. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
So I am Kristen Ynclan. I am currently the Vice President of Total Rewards for Vail Resorts, which is a company that owns 41 resorts on 3 continents. Before that, I led Total Rewards at Fluke and learned Total Rewards at Carrier. So I've been all over the map.
So basically, you're in the dreaded HR, right?
I'm in the secret math department in HR. Most people don't know we have a secret math department, but we do.
Oh, wow. Okay, now you're really see exactly. So you get all this industry secrets on this podcast. Why don't you just give a little introduction? Because I think HR has this sort of aura to it, right? Sort of most people think of HR as like the gatekeepers or the people almost like the hall monitors, or what exactly does HR actually do? I don't want to like demystify it. You know what I'm saying? Let's get to the nitty gritty. What do you folks actually do?
So this is going to stumble onto my personal pet peeve too, is that I hear all the time, HR isn't your friend. And it always drives me nuts because, yeah, obviously, finance isn't your friend. IT isn't your friend. There is no company on the planet that is going to pay for the Bob's Buddy department. It always cracks me up that only gets directed at HR. But part of the reason that happens is that our job as a function is to make the ability for employees to be motivated and perform and do their jobs well, improved. And we do that by having talent acquisition, which is the recruiters that most people talk to on their way in. They make sure that the people the company hires are the right people. You have my department, Total Rewards, which deals with compensation and benefits. So our job is to make sure that once those right people are in the door, we're paying them in a way that's fair and competitive. We're paying them in a way that's equitable across genders and races, and that rewards people for strong performance. And we make sure that you have the benefits that you need to support your family. So very important part of making sure that people are comfortable at companies. You have talent development, which is a function that makes sure that we're teaching people how to be the best leaders they can be, teaching employees how to unlock their potential and learn and grow with the company, and make sure that people understand the company strategy and that talent is being assessed fairly. And then what most people see is their HR business partner, who is someone dedicated to each part of the company. So you'll have a client group, and that's who most people interact with more regularly. The 3 departments I mentioned are back end. So we do all of the work to make sure that those HR business partners have the tools they need to do their job supporting their clients. And then the last big part of human resources is the other part that most people outside of HR interact with on a regular basis, which is shared services. Shared services is basically the operations part of HR. So the old-fashioned, I need your I-9, I have a question that I need an answer to really quick. That's the touch point for HR. And then if it's complicated, they'll filter it out to the rest of the departments. So at a high level, that's who you're talking to in HR.
Okay, so that's like a lot of moving parts then. So you did touch on a good point, though, is that it seems that there's one part that most people interact with, but then like beyond that, there's a whole like all these cogs of machinery going on, right, that do all these, that help make these decisions. But to your earlier point, though, so it's HR is, what would you say like the mission is? It's like the mission is to help the business make this like strategic decisions with personnel. Would that be a good summation?
I would say that's a good general idea. So our job, if I had to boil it down to a sentence, is to make leaders better leaders and to make employees better employees. And we do that through, in my case, providing tools, in shared services case, removing barriers, in talent acquisitions case, finding the right people from the beginning, in talent development's case, literally developing the talent in the organization so they get better at what they do.
Okay, so I get the general thrust then. So really, then your whole focus then is, are people good for the business, right? Are they a good fit? What kinds of things make someone a good fit for a company, just in general? We don't have to talk specifically about tech necessarily, but we can think, what sort of things like make someone, you say, okay, cool, this person fits in with the company, right? Like we can see that this person coming at 8 a.m. working with the rest of us.
That's going to vary a lot by company. At a high level, what makes someone a good fit for a company is usually a sense of connection between the person and the company's values. There are some companies that genuinely value people coming in and being there in person 8 or 10 hours a day. There are some companies that don't care about that and they value specific results. That's where the TA conversation comes in, talent acquisition, making sure that the right people are hired. So that similarity of mission or similarity of purpose to what the company's trying to do and the way that they do it is part of what HR vets for. And the other thing I would say is almost every company looks for potential. When you're hired for a role, one of the questions that gets asked privately in the interview process of all of the interviewers, is this a person who you're going to bring in and they're just going to do this job forever? Have they only shown that they can do the exact job we're hiring them for? Or is this a person who is at this level now, but with coaching and development and opportunity, we expect that they would be able to be promoted? And we tend to prefer, in general, or we tend to push for the business to hire people who could be promoted with the right coaching and development.
That's logical, right? Because you're planning it's a long-term relationship. You're not planning to hire someone for just 6 months. You're planning long-term. So like you would want to see them grow in their position, move up, provide added value for the company as time goes on, right? That's part of the shuffle of your career, basically.
That's exactly right. And there's altruistic and transactional reasons for that. The altruistic reason is that most companies, in all honesty, really do want to have a good working relationship with the employees, because those employees, if we've hired the right folks and we've given them the right tools, will eventually become leaders. So they'll continue the work and the mission of the company. The transactional reason is it's really expensive when people quit or get fired. It costs the company a lot of money. It's really stressful for the people who are left and have to pick up work. It takes a while to recruit. We have to pay usually more money when someone comes in. You may have to pay an outside headhunter firm. So it's just so much better for the stability of what a company is trying to accomplish if we have people that stay for a long time.
Okay, so that's an excellent point, because part of this podcast, I like to talk to people who are either like they're thinking about getting into tech, or maybe they're in the boot camp right now, or maybe they just graduated from one and they got their resume and they've got their boot camp like experience and they're thinking to themselves, okay, cool, I get on the job market, and they're not necessarily from like tech, right? They may have been working like a service position. For example, a lot of people I taught sommelier, I taught some bartenders, waitresses, like people who are, you know what I'm saying, where the power differential in their job was a little bit different than what they're used to. And so they're not used to thinking of, oh, my boss is looking at me in terms of 2 to 3 years from now, can we grow this person to their position? If you're a waitress, when you go for a job, they're looking for, can you start Monday and start serving tables? Exactly. I mean, just to be honest.
Oh, that's exactly right. And it's a huge difference in mindset. And the other thing I would say is that when you look for a job in a company, you need to think about that, not just recognizing that the company feels that way, but think about that for you. So I like to tell people interviews are like dates. Yes, this company is going to either choose to bring you in or not, but you need to really be making a choice on your own of, if I spend 40 hours a week, every single week for the next 3 years at this place, am I going to be happy or am I going to hate it? And you should feel comfortable walking away if you get the vibe that you're going to hate it during the interview process, because if you do, first of all, you're going to have to quit. And if you don't quit, maybe that culture difference is big enough that you get fired over it. So like really be judicious about, is this place a fit for me when you're interviewing?
That's very difficult, I think, for some people who are just looking for their first job. They want to take the first person that will take them. Just be honest, right? Oh my God, they picked me. I'm so happy. And then they don't necessarily go through all the steps of saying, like you just said, it's a first date. Do we really click? Do I see myself like we're going to go to Myrtle Beach and enjoy vacation and go golfing? One thing I did want to get into, because the cool thing about this interview is, again, I mostly interview engineers, right? Data scientists and junior devs and things like that. But from your perspective, you're not an engineer, you're from HR, but you can see like how people get, like, how do we get hired, essentially, right? Like, how do they pick the person that we think is going to have potential in 2 years? So I'm going to ask a really hard question, because this is the thing that people want to know, right? Like, how does someone communicate through their resume, through their body language, through what, hey, 2 years from now, I'm going to be really great? Because I tell people who are junior devs that you want to be the diamond in the rough. Or you want to show them that, yes, I've got some great talent. If you just put effort into me, things will come out great. So you're echoing that. So I'm like, so what's the secret sauce?
So there's a couple things I would call out, and the first one is you recognize that a company is an ecosystem that you fit into. And I think the biggest mistake that people make when they're formatting their resume and when they're planning their interview strategy is that they think just about the department that they're going into. So if you write your resume for fellow engineers, you may not even get to talk to fellow engineers as you go through the interview process. So I will share, I have worked at 6 companies. 3 of them are in tech. I mentioned the 3 that weren't because it's more related to total rewards, which is where I got into things. But I've been at 3 companies in tech in HR as well, and big companies. So I spent time at Yahoo when it was cool 15 years ago, at Cisco, and at BMC Software, where software is literally in the name. It was a server company that transitioned to cloud computing. And the thing that those companies have in common with the companies I'm at now is that before you talk to a hiring manager, you go through someone like me. So if you've written your resume with all technical speak, with this very sort of detail-oriented, like, here's a link to my GitHub, but I'm not going to go into any explanation of what I've learned at my previous roles, the HR person's probably going to screen you out, because within a company ecosystem, it's not just the skill of coding that translates to potential. It's the ability to talk about and communicate the work that you're doing so that it can be translated into outcomes. And it's the ability to understand when some random business person over in marketing says, hey, the customer wants this now, what they actually mean and how you have to code that. So your resume has to speak to your ability to exist in that ecosystem and understand that the engineering department is not the only section of the company that you need to work with. That's the biggest
blasphemy. The engineering section is all that there is. No, that is an exceptional point, though, because on 2 fronts. First off, because again, like we say the word, you're a fit for the company, right? The company is a huge apparatus of different people in different departments, right? You don't fit into engineering, you fit into the company as a whole, like, to your point. And this idea of like communication, let's get into that a little bit more, because I always tell my students that's a very difficult point. It was difficult for me at first, how to take technical terms and then translate them into non-technical speak for basically the rest of the human population. So what I'm hearing is you're evaluating that from just the resume, like in just the initial contact with the person, whether they could do that.
That's part of it, for sure. I think there's the communication piece. Does the resume display a sense of someone being a self-starter? When you're talking to an HR person, they probably aren't going to go check your GitHub profile. But as a junior dev, if you have it and you have some projects in it, that indicates a willingness to go and proactively find things that you can spend your time on. If you're taking on experiences where you're learning more, if you have examples, not just of what you've done, but of the impact that it had, that demonstrates an understanding of your connection to the company. Those are all the kind of things that help a resume stand out versus somebody who just says, I know these 6 programming languages, please hire me. So that's a big part of it. The other thing I would say when it comes to communication is use your rubber duck. I know rubber ducking is great for checking code accuracy. It has another purpose. So as you start to talk about things, do interview practice with your rubber duck. And if you start hearing yourself get in this deep technical rabbit hole, you're going to freak out the HR person who's screening you. So really practice with the rubber ducky, feeling comfortable and confident, just chatting about what you do, and pretend that rubber ducky is a 5-year-old. How would you explain coding to a 5-year-old? That's probably a good level for the HR person, and you're going to want to practice on the rubber ducky to get the condescension out of your voice before you have the interview.
Okay, so this is a much larger point, right? So this idea of screening. So what you're saying is that the first hurdle is not with someone like myself, right? So I've been part of the hiring process. I've listened to people, like they get to the 4th round of interviews, they have the panel interview. It's myself and the other engineers, and we listen to them and we ask them questions and stuff. But before we even get to that, way before we get to that, you have to make yourself understood to someone who is not technical. So there's a balancing act, because on the one hand, it seems like you want to see someone with initiative who's able to explain things in a way that a non-technical person can understand. But they also need to also demonstrate that they do have technical chops. Like, how do you draw that needle? You know what I'm saying? It seems like there's a kind of a balancing act here.
So I think the biggest thing I would call out is that the HR person that you talk to, the recruiter, I made the crack about talk to them like a 5-year-old about your technical expertise. But the thing to keep in mind is that the way that devs look at code and understand code is the way that HR people look at potential employees. We understand what red flags exist, what an attitude is going to fit into a team. So you're getting analyzed as you have that conversation. And that's where the expertise lies. So when I find myself having to rubber ducky and make sure I'm talking, I would explain something to my kiddo in a non-condescending way. It's usually some sort of deep aspect of technical HR that I know if you haven't done it for years, you're not going to understand it. So what that all builds to is that when you're having that screening interview, realize that the person that you're talking to is almost certainly focusing on, are you going to be a good team member? Are you going to raise your hand to take on projects that are falling off the table? Are you going to have ideas? Are you going to bring ideas to the table? Or are you going to just take a task list and execute on the task list? All of those things don't just speak to who you are as a person. They tend to line up with technical competency because all of those qualities are what drive people to go seek technical competencies and become experts at something. So when we're looking for those things, and we see them, we get pretty confident that the person we're talking to has some technical expertise behind that. And we pass them off to the hiring manager who actually specifically checks for that because we know that's not where our expertise lies.
That is a key point because essentially what you're saying is that you can, at the very least, again, this idea of like red flags, right? This idea of, given what you show me in your resume, given that you have a GitHub profile, for example, GitHub profiles, we tell junior devs, have your GitHub profile, put some projects on there. And for at my level, it's meaningless. I don't have it like my GitHub, like I don't put a GitHub profile on my resume. No one for a senior position cares about that at all. But for a junior, it's this weird thing. I tell them to have a GitHub profile, but in the back of my mind, I think to myself, I didn't look at the person's GitHub profile. I didn't go through it, you know what I'm saying? Except for the one time we had UI UX. It seems then that from a junior dev's perspective then, so for someone who's just starting out, for someone who has no background in it, they're wanting to present themselves as a go-getter. They want to make sure that they are able to say that I fit in the culture of the company, that I can talk to non-technical people, that I am driven, that I am going to raise my hand to do stuff, and that I am going to hit the ground running on day one. One thing I wanted to ask, though, was that given a lot of people who go to boot camps, for example, I have to have a hard talk with them about their resume. And usually what I tell them is I have to do this too. If the experience doesn't have to do with the company, again, if you disagree with this statement, please let me know. But I tell them, if the experience does not have to do with the specific industry of the company, for example, if you're going to healthcare, if you worked as a nurse or a doctor previously, that's applicable. Go ahead and put it on your resume. But if you didn't really work in that industry, then they're not really as interested in that experience. So how does someone who doesn't have experience in the industry for the company that they're working for make themselves stand out because their resume looks a little bit sparse?
I think the clarification that's worth having is that if you have corporate experience, so if you've worked in any department in a corporation, it's still a good idea to put that on your resume. If you were a waiter, waitress at a grocery store, bagging groceries, anything like that, yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Those are not jobs that are going to do much for impressing an HR person or a hiring manager for that matter. But if you've been in a corporation, because one of the things we're looking for is the ability to understand corporate strategy, you still have examples of stuff that you can put on there that show your ability to understand where it makes sense to spend your time, your ability to understand return on investment for activities, things like that. So that's one piece I would say, but don't let them overwhelm the resume. So if you do have 2 or 3 years of dev experience, make sure that is taking up the bulk of the space and you're just leaving a little extra. If you have no dev experience, you want to make absolutely sure that people know that you know how to thrive in a corporate environment, because that's one of the things that we're trying to check out. And so in the absence of your technical expertise, that's going to be something that'll give you a little bit of a leg up. The other thing I would say is, what a GitHub profile with a couple of projects on it does is act as a sort of imperfect, but act as a substitute for corporate experience. Because if you've done development at a company, if you've been a developer, you can say, I wrote this code in this program that got this code base much cleaner, or I created this program that optimized this and saved the company X number of dollars. And then you're demonstrating that you understand the value of your work and that you're not just running tasks. If you don't have that, the GitHub profile basically says, look, it's not just that I know the language and that I know what buttons to push. It's that here's the kind of stuff I create with that knowledge as an example of my skill.
That is excellent, because what you're saying, what I'm hearing is that you're very keen on what do my skills bring actually result as far as value to the company, because just knowing C# or just knowing Java is one thing, but I know Java and I can deliver like cost savings, profit, efficiency, that I understand how this relates to the company. That seems like being able to communicate that seems to go a long way from what I'm hearing.
It's huge, especially if you start looking at publicly traded companies, because companies that are publicly traded have a specific and direct responsibility to bring a return for their shareholders. So
Correct.
Companies have a purpose, right? A good company exists for important purposes. Carrier is an air conditioning company, for example. And when I was there, there's this really strong, really great sense of purpose about we're helping people live in a comfortable way. The Carrier refrigeration team is, providing vaccines to places that are too warm for them to survive with refrigerated trucks. So there's a real sense of purpose about the content of what we're doing. But there is also a sense of responsibility about doing it in a fiscally sound way, because shareholders, by purchasing shares and by allowing that stock to go up, provide the capital that the company needs to operate. So we have this responsibility to them to make good choices with what we do. You're going to notice I'm going to talk about former companies and not my current company, because I'm going to say the disclaimer that I should have said at the beginning of this call, which is that I am representing only my own opinions and not the opinions of my current employer. I am not speaking on their behalf or as their representative. I really missed that, but I'm hitting it now. So just wanted to throw that out there too.
They have a fiduciary duty, right? The company has a mission and a goal, right? And you as the prospective employee have to fit into that goal. Right. It's not just that you came out of boot camp and I got my Java and, oh, look, I can do Spring Boot or whatever the language du jour is. It's I help you do the thing that you want to do. Right. That is the core, is what I'm hearing.
That is exactly right. And it is one of the things that underpins one of the other big misconceptions about human resources, which is the HR is not here to help you. They're just here to help the company. And that's my other of the HR pet peeves, because the answer is we're actually here to help both, because there are decades of science about human motivation that show that when people are happy, when they feel connected, when they don't have to worry about their health, when they don't have to worry about their finances, when they have opportunities, when they have a sense of purpose, that they genuinely enjoy their jobs and therefore do better at their jobs. So if I do my job right as an HR person, I'm making it so that you're happier. And when you're happier, you do your job better and the company makes more money. So the answer is I'm doing both. It's not a one or the other situation. And it cracks me up when people say the thing about HR is there for the company. Yes. If you just are annoyed by your coworkers, we're not going to go help you with your personal problem. You need to suck it up and be an adult. But if you are getting harassed by your manager, if you are getting mistreated, if you're getting discriminated against, and we don't do something about that, it harms the company. You could sue. We could find out that you and other really strong, talented people end up quitting because they're not happy. We could find out that teams are failing to perform because they're not happy. So by helping you, I also help the company. And that's the big distinction that I think people need to recognize about how HR fits into the ecosystem.
I think that's an excellent point. I try to drive it home with bootcamp students too. I think that the idea that their well-being could possibly be, again, because a lot of people who go into coding maybe work from jobs where your well-being isn't necessarily something the company invests lots of effort into, right? So they're just not used to that. So it's a new frontier. I'm just being honest. But so let's switch gears a little bit, because another thing I wanted to ask was, okay, self-taught boot camp, whatever. You're a junior dev. You don't have much experience actually working on an actual team, and you want to get hired. You want to get your start into tech. As far as company size, I know a lot of people start off with their stars in their eyes about FANG companies or MANG companies, whatever they call it now. What is realistic? Is it feasible to get into a FANG right off the bat, or is going for a smaller, medium-sized company a little more realistic? What's the vibe there?
It is absolutely a pipe dream to think that you're going to go from a boot camp to one of the FANG companies. It just doesn't happen. And that, I think, is the biggest thing that people need to get a reality check about. You also really should be thinking about what kind of experience do you want? Because the thing I'll point out, having been at 3 tech companies and 3 companies that are not in the tech industry, so 2 manufacturing, 1 hospitality, the thing that all 6 of those companies have in common is that all 6 hire developers. And the ones that are outside of the tech industry often offer a really different experience than the ones that are in the tech industry. There is a culture of move fast and break things, be a disruptor, get stuff done, have hustle. All of the sort of Silicon Valley big FANG companies are really building off of that. Amazon in particular is legendary for having this really aggressive, really push people kind of culture because Jeff Bezos was a workaholic. And so it creates this mentality that everyone has to be a workaholic to survive. When I was at BMC and at Carrier, my work-life balance is absolutely incredible. And I'll say my work-life balance at Vail Resorts is absolutely incredible too. So when you look outside of that tech industry, other companies still have these jobs open and have these opportunities for people. And it's a lot more realistic to go from a boot camp to a place like a Carrier that is trying to hire people to build sort of its first round of proprietary software. Not at this point, they're on probably round 4 or 5 of proprietary software, but look for those companies in other industries and you may find that the experience you're getting is a lot cooler experience than going and trying to hustle in Silicon Valley with the people that candidly probably went to Cal Poly or Berkeley or Michigan or Rensselaer. Like you're competing with people that have really strong educational backgrounds. It's a big long shot to go from a boot camp to that.
Okay, I'm glad you said that because I have to have that conversation with my students too. Because no, they get this is a salary you could make when you get out of boot camp, and I say yes in the strictest sense. Google, honestly speaking, Google, Amazon, they have a completely different interview process. Like the things that they're looking for are different. The day to day is different. Let's compare and contrast. If you're a software developer at, let's say, Bob's Pizza, right? You're a software developer at Bob's Pizza. How does that really differ from what you would do at like a FANG company? And again, I know you haven't worked at both, but let's imagine if we can give some people like our audience a little bit of a sense of how different these things are.
So I think the biggest difference when you look at FANG companies versus non-tech companies that hire devs is that at FANG companies, the code is the product. They're building software, they're building firmware, and the code itself is the product that they are selling, the thing that they have to go to market on. And so there is a spotlight on it. There's a lot of pressure. There are tight deadlines to meet. And don't get me wrong, those things exist in some form in other companies. But what you're doing in companies outside of the tech industry is using your code to enhance the product. Carrier makes air conditioning units. They're going to keep making air conditioning units. They don't need to have software for that. But if you want to be able to change the temperature on your phone, now they need an app and they need a UI and they need all of the firmware that goes with that and all the software that goes with that. So they're building enhancements to their products. And what that leads to, especially if you have any interest in learning about business as a discipline and learning about how companies run, if you find that fascinating, you will get better opportunities to learn about a corporate ecosystem at a non-tech company because you are creating the core project at a core product at a FANG company, and you are enabling the product at the other companies. So there's just much more of a connection that you have to a product that is not what you're spending your day-to-day on.
That is a fascinating point because what you're saying is then that if I work for, again, Bob's Pizza or whoever else, I'm learning about business, right? I'm learning about marketing. I'm learning about advertising. I'm learning about suppliers. I'm learning about transit. There's all sorts of things that by making this app that enhances pizza delivery or supply chain type things. Yes, I have the code and maybe I don't have to be as hardcore as a FANG company would have to be in order to do the product, but I am learning like a whole breadth of information about other areas. So it seems from that perspective, that can be very interesting for some people, whereas a FANG would be more algorithms and memory
Yep.
management and hardcore computer science stuff and less about any other area that has to do with the business. Because as you said, the code is the product.
That's exactly the distinction. And I think the other thing that I would say is, and this is true across all industries, but to different degrees, at companies that are mid-sized, by which I mean about 1,000 to 5,000 people, you're going to find that you have to wear multiple hats. So if you like that kind of thing, if you like being allowed to be creative, being allowed to take on projects when you raise your hand, getting to learn different things about the business, it's good to target companies that size. When you start to get into the size of the FANG companies, oh my goodness, there are 27 people doing every single thing because there's so much that they have to care for that the person who wears 4 hats in a company that's smaller, they would be working more hours than exist in a week at a company that size. So now that's split into 4 jobs or 4 whole
Correct.
departments, right? So the opportunity to learn and grow is really fantastic at a mid-sized company. And I would caution people when they look at companies under 1,000 people that even if that company has fantastic leadership, a highly creative project or product, genius inventors sitting on the engineering team, strong business leadership, that size of under 1,000 people becomes risky because the macroeconomic factors that affect companies can crush a company that size through no fault of their own. I cough, Silicon Valley Bank cough.
We've been there.
That's the kind of thing you want to look out for that. And if you, especially if you're in a situation where you have a family, you need stability, you want the confidence that your job is still going to be there. Carrier's a 100-year-old company. They're going to be here for another 100 years. They're not going anywhere. Really think about when we talk about what kind of experience do you want, think about that from a size and industry perspective too.
So that's actually fascinating because full disclosure, I was affected by the whole Silicon Valley Bank thing. If our audience is wondering why we're laughing at that, like I totally got caught up in all that, but everything's okay. But yeah, so small, again, like you said, smaller companies, economic headwinds can be way more affect them way more than long-standing companies who've been through several boom and bust cycles and are still standing. So
exactly.
that seems to be something you have to. So how can someone evaluate that then? Again, because I don't know if 6 years ago I would have known how to do that. Again, 6 years ago when I got transferred from being a teacher to a software engineer, I was just like, oh my God, someone hired me. I'm so happy. I'll do whatever you want me to do. And I wasn't thinking about company size and industry and learning other things. That came later. But so how could someone like maybe learn some rules of thumb to evaluate that for someone who's just new to that very concept?
So if you're looking at publicly traded companies, they are required by law to release a proxy statement and 10K filing every year. And they're required to have it on an accessible platform, which is usually their website in a section called Investor Relations. And if you're just getting started and you want to figure out a little bit more about a company's culture, one of the things you can do is pull up those documents and just skim through them. There's always a narrative section on the things that the company cares about. And if you look and read that and wow, this company cares about stuff that I care about too, that may be the start of understanding that it's a good fit. The other thing I would say is for the same reason that I talk about all of the sort of role of HR in a company supporting both you and the company at the same time, look for companies where you're passionate about what they do and then start to assess from there whether you think that there's stability. I would say be very wary of any company that went public through a SPAC, which is a special way of doing an IPO where some of the sort of roadshow rules of IPO don't apply. And be really cautious with these companies that are funded by venture capitalists because there's this constant boom and bust cycle because of the fact that those companies are still in their startup phase. But in general, what I would say is if you want to learn a specific niche and get really good at it and have a huge team of people that you can learn from, go to a really big company, 10,000 or more. If you want to wear a bunch of hats, have some flexibility, have some creativity, and have room to grow, aim for that 1,000 to 10,000 person size. And if you are in a position where you can roll the dice on stability and it might have a big payoff in the form of stock options or a pre-IPO grant or anything in the package that's really attractive, that's where I would say target under 1,000 people, but just recognize that it's a little bit like hitting the lottery. Most of the time, you're going to either just have the job for a little while and then go somewhere else, or you're going to be potentially caught up in one of those macroeconomic trends that can hit pretty hard.
So you hit upon something that I wanted to start picking back on, switch gears a little bit, job hopping. All right. The idea of switching from one job to another. And with programmers, right, a lot of times, again, sometimes we don't follow of our own, right? The COVID, there was Silicon Valley Bank. Some people get caught up in those macroeconomic factors, as you just said. But I've noticed personally that I've known people who I've worked with, who are my coworkers, they would stay at a company for 2 to 3 years, and then they would pack up the wagons. They would head back. They head to Oregon or the California Gold Rush or wherever they happen to go to. How does that look to you as a person looking at someone's resume, right? Like, what is the balance between red flag and, oh, this is normal?
It's going to vary by the person who looks at the resume. I'll tell you, me personally, when I'm hiring someone, I look for evidence that the job they took is better or more high level than the job they left. So if you're a junior dev and then you get to developer title and then you get senior dev and you're doing all of those within 2 or 3 years, I'm generally going to interpret that as you being a high potential, highly motivated person. Companies sometimes move slower than people are ready for. So you're going to go and you're going to get more than that. And as long as I know that we're in a position to help move you faster than that internally, you're going to be great because I trust that you're going to be trying to move up and that you're going to have high potential. If you're moving every couple of years for a job that's at the exact same level, doing the exact same thing, it's going to make me question, are you someone who's difficult to work with? Are you someone who gets bored easily but doesn't have the potential to do more than what you're doing? Are you someone who's getting fired but just happening to have stuff lined up right after? So those are the kind of questions people ask, but they're not 100% deal breakers. And what I mean by that is coding and development, especially software engineering, and some of the sort of hotter languages are in such high demand that a lot of companies will look at that and say, yeah, we get them for 3 years, that's fine. And they'll just deal with it. I think if you're switching every 6 months, if you have gaps, so if I was here from January to July and then my next job doesn't show up until November, that's the kind of thing where we start to go, okay, I don't know that this person is really displaying the kind of forging of a relationship with a company that we would want to have, because it goes back to that people leaving and getting fired is expensive for companies conundrum. We want people that we are going to be able to trust to stay for quite a while if possible.
Right. Okay. So again, it comes back to the core mission, right? Like, how does this person fit into our core mission? And you're looking at their history and trying to like evaluate, where do you see them? But so then what I'm hearing is then there's a little bit of a balance there. So it's not necessarily bad that someone leaves, because I do tell my bootcamp students, it is reasonable sometimes people to stay for 2 to 3 years. Like, I've seen it, I've done it, where you leave and you get 35% more at your new company, and no one would blame you for doing that, objectively speaking. Yeah. So if it seems then that that's not necessarily a strike against someone, but like you said, you're evaluating also to see, yes, they're going to continue to grow. Do we have enough like room for them to grow into at our company?
That's exactly right. Like I said, that's why we look at titles too, because if you're leaving for a promotion every time, no one's going to fault you for that. That becomes us having to evaluate, are we going to be able to move you fast enough to keep you? And that's on us. That's part of the company culture fit assessment. If you have this sort of, like I said, lateral movement, what it's showing is a fickleness or an inability to stay at one place for a long time, an inability to potentially get along with coworkers. And we know on the HR side that one toxic coworker, one person who's really hard to get along with, can create a bad culture across a whole team that lingers even after they leave. So we want to avoid that like the plague.
Oh yeah, that can, one rotten apple can spoil the entire barrel for years to come. Actually, it can be that damaging. So then from your perspective, then I think people can appreciate just how weighty this decision is of picking a person. Because it sounds like from this whole conversation, what it sounds like is you're really looking at lots of different metrics of a person and trying to evaluate that just from a resume and possibly from a phone screen.
Yeah, and it's in particular when it's a job seekers market, meaning there are more jobs available than people trying to get to them. It's a lot easier on the HR side to evaluate folks, but it's not a better situation for us because we'll open a job and we'll only get 5 candidates. And if we're lucky, maybe one of them is qualified. So if you have a pulse, a brain, and a good attitude, you're going to show up on Monday. That's what we choose. But if we're exiting a job seekers market. The last 3 or 4 months, the job market has cooled off, and there are way more job seekers than jobs. So for comparison, 2 years ago, I posted a job that was an entry-level compensation role. It's an easy title. It's one of those great stepping stone roles for HR. It's the kind of thing where you should just throw your resume in the hat if you've done anything with finance, anything with HR before. And I purposefully did not require prior compensation experience. I got about 7 resumes. Luckily, one of them was an amazing rock star person who I got to hire and work with, and she's fantastic. If she ever sees this, she'll know who she is because she rocks. But by contrast, I have an open position on my team right now. I posted a role that is incredibly niche, requires 2 skill sets that most people don't have both of, has a title that makes no sense in the market, and because of the nature of it, I had to require experience and education for it. So I can't just take someone who's never done it before and train them from scratch. Right. And I got 90 resumes in 2 days. So that's the transition that we're seeing in the job market. And that's something to watch out for. The HR people who are looking at are screening piles and piles of resumes right now for every job that's open.
So that dovetails into one thing I wanted to ask, because again, I like to be real. Things change, right? It does go from a job seekers market to the company's market. Things shift back and forth. When we're in this current state where it's 90 job seekers for one post, let's be honest. If it were me, I would be looking for ways to put people into the not really pile. You know what I'm saying? I would be, it's the way, because there's just too many people. How does someone, if they're not a purple squirrel, they don't have everything that they need, how do they get, what's the way that they can, I don't know, rise above the morass? You know what I'm saying? Like, how could they put a little spotlight on themselves, at least give themselves a good shot?
So there's 2 strategies that job seekers can use. The first is take your resume, make it as reflective of you as a person as possible. Make sure you're highlighting your skills. Make sure that it's clean, clear, easy to read. Don't treat it like a curriculum vitae. It shouldn't be 10 pages long, even if you have 20 years of experience. There are a lot of CEO resumes that are only a couple pages. I've been in this with deep expertise for 12 years, and my resume is 1 page by design. So that's the kind of thing where more isn't necessarily better because someone's trying to read it quickly. You can use visuals. What are the languages you have and what's the proficiency on a scale of 1 to 5? You can use a dot matrix and just 4 stars, 5 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars. That gives a lot of information in a very small space, and it's really easy for someone to see quickly. That's the biggest thing I think that helped me. Is before I would try to narratively explain all of my skills, and then it took 3 pages to do. When I said, here's this little box and I'm going to show you my skills, I'm communicating the same information. I'm going to get asked about it to have to prove it, but I'm doing it in a box this small on the side of a piece of paper. But in terms of sort of strategy to stand out, the 2 options I would say are make that resume as reflective of you as possible and just toss it into the wind. Every job at every company that you think would be a good fit, just go, even if you're into the hundreds of applications, and accept the fact that because you're not tailoring your resume, you're going to get a lot of declines out of hand. And that's okay, because you only need 1 to offer you a job. The alternative, and you can combine these for, I think, the best effectiveness, is when you see a job that you really particularly are interested in. Let's say you read the job description and you're like, oh man, that's exactly my skill set. I'd be so excited to do this. This company looks awesome. All the stuff they're saying about it, I just want to be here. That's the time to slow down, take a step back, look at the resume that you have, and do some tailoring. Is there a project you didn't choose to highlight because you didn't think it was all that important, but it's exactly in line with this industry? Okay, take something else out and replace it with that. Is there a coding language that you're intermediate at, so you didn't bother putting it on there, but that's what they're asking for? Go ahead and add it in and put that you're intermediate. That may still be enough for them to be willing to make you an offer. So make that shift. The other thing I would say is I don't really care about generic cover letters, and most recruiters don't either. But a well-written cover letter that is specific to the job, connects it to your skills, explains why you're interested and expresses a genuine interest in what the company is doing with that position goes a really long way. I have interviewed and actually hired people whose skill set on their resume I would have just passed over because they wrote a cover letter that said, here's how I think, here's what I do, here's how I approach problems. I know that it doesn't look like I have this much experience in this, but actually I've done this other thing and it's very similar. And suddenly I understand why they think this job makes sense for them, and it makes me want to talk to them.
That is absolutely fascinating. So again, it harkens back to the mission of the company. Like, how do I fit in with the mission of this company, with its stated goals, with its values, with its aims and projects? And if I can basically, the faster someone can communicate that through their resume, through their cover letter, it seems the better. Like, that seems, if you can cut to that part, cut to the chase, you get ahead of the pack. That seems to be the core. If I'm correct in saying that, that seems to be the core of the message here.
Yeah, absolutely. When I look at two resumes, let's say I'm looking for someone with project management experience. If I see a resume that says, I have project management experience, I have a PMP certification, I have studied these process improvement methodologies, I'm going to go, okay, great. They check some boxes, but it's not that interesting. I see that they have the background, but nothing's jumping out at me. If I have a similar resume that says, I have led projects that saved the company over $1 million by improving the efficiency of this team without costing this person's time, or I unlocked an outcome in a project that was destined to fail and I managed to get it back on track. What you're showing me is that you understand what a project manager is supposed to care about and what they're supposed to do and why companies have project managers. So that's all well and good that someone over here is sitting there with a PMP certification. Okay, you have a set of spreadsheets that you can pull up when you want to ask questions. This person over here, even if they have no training or background, understands what their mandate is as a project manager, and I'm going to want to talk to them before I talk to the person with the on-paper skills just listed with no context.
That is a powerful point. All right. That is, I think when someone's first starting their resume, again, I was like, I had to go through and cut out a lot of my teaching experience, but then I went back, and actually the reason I got my first job was because I could say, you have a lot of training to do. Like, you go to new projects, you have new customers all the time, and you need to get people up to speed on robotics. Hey, I'm really great at explaining things to people. I can learn fast. That's why I said, I am great at taking new knowledge, quickly assimilating it, putting it into a form other people can readily like understand and do actionable things with. And they're just like, yep, that's exactly what we're looking for. And even though they don't have experience, they're just like, yep, that sounds great. Come on in.
That's exactly right. And the other thing I would say is, this sounds very tactical, but it's the most important thing in the flippin' world with a resume. Don't have typos. Don't have weird margins that don't look good, especially if you're a UI UX designer, if that's the path that you want to go on as you've learned coding and development. If your resume isn't straightforward, clear, easy to follow, designed, that's a UI to you as a person. I am not going to hire you if your personal UI looks like crap. So
fair. Like yeah, exactly. That is your presentation. That's why I say with the GitHub portfolio, I say, if you're going to do UI UX too, as my personal thing, my personal advice I would give to someone, if you do, like, I'm more back end. So personally, in my resume or portfolios, okay, cool, they have algorithms and stuff. If your job is to make stuff look pretty, I want to go to your GitHub portfolio and I want to be like amazed, like visually. I want to just have be like Studio Ghibli, right? Like, I want to see that. And if I don't see that, then it's something that did a disconnect.
Exactly. Your resume is a display of how you choose to communicate your personal background. So the biggest problem I run into, by the way, is that even though I know some of the accomplishments that I've had are real, genuine accomplishments, and I can cite them and say, here's the return that we got, and it's proven and it's on paper, just writing it down feels like bragging. So step back and make sure, just brag a little, and then rubber ducky your resume to see if you looked at it and it was someone else's resume, would you go, oh man, I do not like this arrogant butthead? Or would you go, this is a good resume, right? So like, accept the fact that resumes are bragging by their nature. You are bragging about the great stuff you did to try and prove that you will do great stuff at the next place.
Okay, and that's another good point because again, in a lot of other industries, you don't. There's nothing to. I hate to say this. I'm not trying to sound too mean, but there's not really much to brag about. I worked at this other service job, and I did service things, and now I like to do service things for you. And that's typically, in having worked in a service position for years myself, that's typically what you do, right? And so you have to get over this mental gap of, hey, I need to toot my own horn. You have to be your, you have to be your own advocate.
That's exactly right. You have to recognize that. I'll use my discipline, for example. If someone has the title compensation analyst, that could mean anything from they're filling out some spreadsheets and they're putting in some formulas, and then an outside vendor does all of the analysis and they go, yay, and put it forward, all the way to they're going and sitting down with business leaders and having an assessment of a part of the company where people are leaving and looking at whether it's compensation and what are the different things that we could be using. And both of those people are going to have the title compensation analyst. So if you've done the second one, which is a much higher order skill, much harder, much more strategic, much more business oriented, and you just tell me I have filled out salary surveys and done compensation analysis, I'm going to assume you're doing the first one. If you say, I have sat down and explained to leaders that this and this was causing attrition and we managed to drop the attrition rate by 5%, then I know you understand what you're trying to do. So it may feel like you're bragging to be like, I got us to drop attrition by 5%. But you know what? You did. And I need to know that, or I'm going to pick somebody else that made a point to say it.
That is an amazing point. Because again, differentiation, like the title only goes so far. Again, you have to advocate for yourself and display that you understand the core competency, like the actual core skill that is the inner working of the job that you're going for. There's a lot of strategy to this. Resume, again, advocacy for yourself, breaking out the strategy, researching the companies. This has been a fascinating conversation. So I hope we have some more time later on to do more. But hopefully, I think this will help anyone listening. I think if you're just starting off, like if you're not in tech and thinking about it, if you're like in a boot camp or just graduating from a boot camp, I think this has been just like filled with useful, actionable information.
I'm so glad. And I have to tell you, I am a genuine and real HR nerd. I actually just really enjoy it. I find it fascinating. I find it this sort of fun logic problem. And I got to wear my favorite shirt, which I cannot wear at work because that would not be appropriate. I am just delighted to get to talk about HR in this shirt. It's maybe my favorite thing of all time.
Absolutely perfect. All right, we're going to end it here, but thank you so much, Kristen. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation.
Thank you.